So, like I said, I joined Infosys based on my programming knowledge. But while I was working, when I was allotted projects, I realized that this knowledge is not enough, and you need to know like a lot of other things as well, like in Python, how do we integrate with other stuff, and where do we write the platform that we use, and things like that. We need to know as well when you are working. And this is sort of the phase when I was working and learning at the same time. So I used to take a lot of time completing my user stories. So we all have 3 months of notice period, but even whenever the recruiter sees a 3 months notice period, they usually just move on to the next profile, and they won't even call you for the interview. So here what you can do is
Hello everyone, this is Mansa Nagraj from Trendy Tech. Welcome to another exciting episode on Conversations with Big Data Experts. A journey of a determined individual to succeed in the IT domain, coming from a non-IT background, now working as a Databricks engineer in Impetus. Let's get to know how Dhruv could make this successful leap into the IT domain. Watch until the end to know his plan and strategy to become a successful data engineer. Hi Dhruv, a very warm welcome. Firstly, a huge congratulations on your recent switch to Impetus as a Databricks engineer. Thank you so much for being a part of this session to share your experiences as a big data engineer. Well, let's get started with a brief introduction about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for welcoming me here, Mansa. My name is Dhruv Dubey, and I've been working as a data engineer for the past 2.5 years now. And I graduated back in 2021 as an electrical engineering graduate. After that, I joined Infosys, where I was working as an Azure data engineer for 2 years. And here I contributed to two client-facing projects, which was a really good exposure to me in the data engineering domain. And after that, like you mentioned, I recently joined Impetus, where I've been working as a Databricks engineer. And here I've worked on DLT pipelines and how we can optimize costs using them.
Perfect. That's a pretty interesting journey. Well, coming from a non-IT background, how did you convince yourself to build a career in the IT industry? Also, coding can be daunting for even a computer science graduate many a times. What were the preparation plans that made you develop the needed skills for this industry?
So yeah, I was always interested in the field of IT and what we can do, how we can write code to solve real world problems out there. So I always wanted to transition. And back in my college, so I was in the COVID batch, right? So during my final year, our college made everything free. All the courses on Coursera were free, and all these MOOC courses that were there, they were really useful as well, which were taught by IIT professors. So I just decided to use this time and these courses, these resources that were there for free, to do the transition in my final year. And I just started learning Python here. Python required for data science, Python required for data analytics, and some basic DSA as well, and some SQL skills. And then I talked to a couple of friends of mine from CS background and talked to them about what is required here in this field for interviews and things like that. So I just upskilled myself in that, and then I started giving interviews for a survey-based company, and that's when I joined Infosys.
Well, what made you to want to pursue data engineering as a career path after having, worked in Infosys? Were there any factors that helped you in developing that interest towards data engineering?
Sure. So like I mentioned before, I did a little bit, started learning how to program. I did a little bit of research in what do these developers do, like what does a software developer do, what does a backend developer do, what does a full stack developer do, a data engineer, a data scientist. So I looked into these roles and what the daily responsibilities would look like. And here is when I realized that the work of data engineer was really fascinating for me personally. And what we do with millions of data, how we perform these real-time solutions for millions of users, Netflix, Instagram, everyone is using data these days. So that was really fascinating for me, and that sort of drove me towards big data. And I actually joined Infosys because at Infosys we get this preference of which tech stack do you want to work on, and I really wanted to have that preference since the beginning. So yeah, I joined Infosys because of that. Then I chose big data as my preference, and then I started working as a data engineer.
That's interesting. Well, how did your journey of upskilling begin? Well, if you would like to pursue data engineering, definitely there are a plethora of technologies available. What were the major resources that proved beneficial in equipping you with the needed expertise to succeed in this field?
So, like I said, I joined Infosys based on my programming knowledge. But while I was working, when I was allotted projects, I realized that this knowledge is not enough, and you need to know like a lot of other things as well, like in Python, how do we integrate with other stuff, and where do we write the platform that we use, and things like that. We need to know as well when you are working. And this is sort of the phase when I was working and learning at the same time. So I used to take a lot of time completing my user stories, and this was sort of a learning skill for me. And on my second project, actually, which was a bigger project, which I was working with senior developers, and I was working with really talented people. So that's when I realized, in these meetings was when I realized that I do not know a lot about these technologies, about Spark, about Azure, and all of these things, and I need to upskill myself. I realized that. And even though I was working already for 1.5 years, so that's when this was also the time when I have been following Sir Sumit sir for a really long time, and he had just released the cloud program course, which was when I looked at the syllabus of this particular program, and this was the exact technologies that I was working on. So Azure Data Factory, Azure Databricks, Spark, and the ETL processes. So I just decided to take it. And I decided to take it because it would help me with two things, right? It will help me become a better developer at the work that I'm currently doing, and with the comprehensive skills that I gain, I could then look for a different job role as well. So these were the two reasons that sort of brought me to this course, and then that's when I started upskilling in the field of big data.
Well, for all our viewers, if you would like to know more about the Ultimate Big Data Masters Program, which is Azure Cloud focused by Sumit sir, I would leave them in the comment section in the description as well for your reference. So, Dhruv, what are the key tools and technologies that the course was able to help you out with and that are important for a data engineer?
So I have mentioned these skills a bit in the past. So we need Spark, of course. So, and Spark, it's not just that you need to write a query, right? Because you can write a query in SQL style in Spark only. But in Spark, you need to understand the depths of it, in the internals of it, how the data is being distributed, how are you managing, how can you do it more efficiently. And Spark is all about efficiency. It's not just about doing a particular solving a particular problem statement, but it's about how fast can you solve it. And if you can solve it quickly, then that sort of makes you the better developer, and that sort of brings you above the scale that others are at. So these are some things that you would only know if you know about Spark in a bit more depth. And the other things taught are like Databricks, where we write our Spark code, and how Databricks have implemented these Delta Live tables and the Delta Lake, and what is this architecture, why did this architecture come in the first place, what was the need of it, and things like that are also discussed in the course in really good depth. And it is important to know the context of these technologies and why we are learning it, why they are getting so famous these days. And apart from that, there's some basics of Git and CI/CD, which is not there in all the courses. These minor modules help a lot, like the resume building session, the LinkedIn session, and even in the projects that Sir has mentioned, he has mentioned some best practices. How do we implement testing? How do we deploy our code? And how do we organize our things in a real project that is out there? So this will definitely help people. And even I believe the course is not finished yet, so we also always also have auto loaders and Delta Live tables to go. So this is a really comprehensive course, and these are the skills that are required in the market right now. And
as you mentioned, the course also had some important modules around resume building, LinkedIn profile building. Well, I understand that there is one thing, that is you gain the technical expertise. There is another thing, that you have to present yourself in a very well-mannered way so that you can get the right opportunities. So what are the pre-interview preparations required for anyone who is just starting off with their interview phase for a big data engineer role? If you could throw some light on that.
Sure. So once you have realized that you can start giving interviews, and you have good enough knowledge to answer the questions that I just mentioned. So in pre-interview, what you would need to do is create an online presence. So you should have a proper LinkedIn profile, you should have proper keywords in your profile, what recruiters look for, and you should have a resume handy. You should have, if you have not worked on any projects, then you should have a GitHub link in your resume and in your LinkedIn profile, where recruiters can directly go ahead and look at your work if you have something to showcase. So you have to create an online presence. And after that, for example, if you are you started giving interviews, and if you have an interview like 2 days or 3 days down the line, so at this point you should not be learning new technologies. At this point you should be revising all your concept, revising Spark techniques, interview questions, and writing some hands-on code, because sometimes interviewer may ask you to share your screen and write the code. So you need to practice, you need to revise, you need to look at your notes, and yeah, these are some of the pre-interview preps, I could say.
Right. Thank you for those tips. Well, the next thing that anyone would be wanting to know is, what are the different interview rounds one can expect for a data engineering role? Could you please brief us at a high level on what are the important technologies usually the interviewers test one on in each of these rounds?
Sure. So most of the companies that I gave interviews for took interviews in 3 rounds. So one plus minus one here and there we can always expect in these companies. So first interview would mostly be around the coding knowledge that you have. So it will revolve around Python and SQL mostly. For me, it did, and I did not appear for Mang level of companies. So these were based on my experience only. So I realized that Python and SQL you should know at medium level at least, and you should be able to answer any type of question that they can ask, and it can be anything. They can modify the question, they can ask you to modify your answer as well based on that. So here your Python and SQL knowledge, and for some companies I was also asked PySpark related questions, like if you write a SQL query, then what is the PySpark version of this. So this was the first round majorly, where they would check your coding skills. The second part would be the technical round, where you would be asked questions on Spark here, and what is Spark, the internal architecture of Spark, how did you implement the optimization techniques of Spark, or did you implement it, or what was the need of these techniques, and your project related questions, whether you have implemented these in your project or not, and how did you implement it, and a bit in depth they would go in these questions. And then they might ask architectural based questions, like we want to process these files, then what would be the best way for in Spark, or which file format do we need to use, which compression technique do we need to use, and we have different locations where we are reading, then how would we read, and things like that. And you would be also asked questions about any ETL tool that you may have worked on. So it could be, for me it was Azure Data Factory, and for me questions were like, how do you end-to-end flow, you should know the end-to-end flow, what are link services, how can I bring data from XYZ source to this on-prem source that I have, so what would be the process for that, how can we do it. And there would be some situations based questions, like I have this 100 files that are landing and I need to create a efficient pipeline for this particular problem, then how would you do it. So some questions around an ETL tool that you have worked on. And apart from that, then now the thing depends on the business requirement, whatever they may have. If they have like Snowflake requirement, then they would have asked Snowflake related questions, or Power BI related questions, or if they have data modeling or data warehousing related requirement, then they would have asked questions regarding migration. How would you migrate, what are the steps that you would take, how would you perform the data modeling, data warehousing. Some SCD related questions, whether you have encountered slowly changing dimensions or not, and things like that. So that would be mostly the second round of interview. And in the third round of interview is where you would be talking to the manager, or the person whose requirement this is. So here you would be asked project related questions, like what is the work that you have done in your project, how did you contribute in your project, what kind of pipelines did you build. And here you would also be asked architectural related questions, like what was the architecture that you followed, explain the Delta Lake architecture, explain why it is required, and things like that. How can you optimize these queries, and why did you how did you identify that there was a need to optimize these queries and things like that, you would be asked in the managerial round. And here also you would be getting a lot of situation based questions. So here they might have a particular situation and they would ask you, and they would try to find your approach on how you are trying to tackle this particular problem. So you can of course give multiple approaches here as well. And yeah, basically they are checking your thinking ability and how you can manage a particular problem. So that would be the third round. And yeah, I think that would be how the interview rounds go.
All right, perfect. Thanks for those extensive. Thanks for that extensive explanation on the different interview rounds. Well, the next thing that I would like to know is about what it is like to be a data engineer. What are the day-to-day responsibilities? Could you also explain to us about how the project tasks are assigned, and what are the industry norms and process to action the tasks assigned to a data engineer?
Uh, sure. So yeah, most of the companies out there distribute their workload in agile methodology. So what happens here is we have epics which are divided into scenarios, which are divided into user stories, and then these user stories will define the business logic of what the work is that needs to be done. So it could be anything ranging from pipeline creation. So if you are a junior developer, you would have to create a pipeline, maintain it, debug it, try to test it, validate it, and debug a particular error that has already occurred, and things like that. And if you are a senior developer, then you would need to be involved in the architectural part as well. So if there is a business requirement, then how would we convert it into a working pipeline? Like what techniques will we use? Should we use a delta table or an external table or a view, and things like that? You would want to be, they would want your inputs in these things. And of course, apart from that, you would have to create the end-to-end pipeline involving writing the code, testing, validation, and deployment as well. So yeah, that would be basically mostly.
Perfect. That's an interesting day of a data engineer. That's how it would look like. Even though it is complicated and challenging, it would be interesting. Well, lastly, many of our learners, I would like to address two important things. One is the notice period, and the other one is the CTC, right? How should one handle 90 days notice period? Because that's been a question from a lot of our learners as such. And what is an average CTC one can expect as a data engineer? And how should one ensure that they get the right CTC that they deserve?
Sure. Yeah. So we all have 3 months of notice period, but even whenever the recruiter sees a 3 months notice period, they usually just move on to the next profile, and they won't even call you for the interview. So here, what you can do is, whenever a recruiter asks you to join in 45 days or 60 days, you just need to say yes, because what happens is you can always talk to your own manager. You can have a good conversation, healthy conversation about it, and what you need to do to get an early release even before you look for the jobs and things like that. And apart from that, if you are already on the bench, then you can also try to get an early release. And in some cases, if you do not get early release, or if your manager is not allowing for an early release, in my case, my manager was really supportive. But if that is not the case for you, then you would need to talk to the recruiting team after a couple of months that I need to extend my notice period because my current company is not letting me leave. And most of the times, these companies would rather extend your notice, extend your joining rather than go through the hiring process again. So your first, from your perspective, what you need to do is just get the interview scheduled. If the notice period, if they are asking for 45 to 60 days of joining, and if they are asking for an immediate joiner 15 to 30, that's when you should say no, basically, because that soon you cannot, you won't be able to join, and they won't extend it for 2 months as well. So these are some of the tips and tricks that you can do to handle your notice period.
Perfect, Dhruv. It was a pleasure talking to you. Also, any final advice, tips, or thoughts for all those big data enthusiasts who are looking forward to build a career in this field? Maybe related to practice. How do you practice any on free online resources which you can utilize to do practice the code and all of that? So, anything from your end?
Sure. So yeah, I would just suggest that whenever you are learning, just try to spend 20% of your time while learning, like watching videos and tutorials, but 80% of your time while doing something, like do a project or do some hands-on, and that's when you know that you have a particular skill set or not. That's when you know when you can solve a particular problem or not, and you can use any of the platforms like Lead Code for SQL practice, for Python for SQL practice as well. We have Databricks Community Edition, which is there where you can write Spark code. So here you can only like Spark code for syntactical purposes, but you won't be able to test the optimization techniques that are there because they only provide a single node cluster. And for that, actually, if you need to test, you need to buy a cloud environment or Databricks environment. So yeah, some free resources I would suggest would be the SQL playlist by Sumit sir that we have, and from Ankit Bansal as well. And for like the PySpark question interview playlist that Sumit sir had just released was really good as well. So yeah, that's my final advice. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dhruv. That was a really extensive explanation of your journey and what your experiences are. So guys, if you've enjoyed the video and found it informative, do show some love and support by subscribing to the channel and liking the video. If you have any queries related to career in big data, do mention them in the comments. We will try to address them in the upcoming videos. Thank you so much for watching.